This podcast is brought to you by Amusement Warehouse Magazine, the industry's largest trade publication. We cover amusement parks, carnivals, fairs, festivals, history, safety columns. We really got it all when it comes to the amusement business. Only remaining print publication in the amusement industry on a regular basis. So if you're interested in what the amusement industry has to offer, subscribe today. You can subscribe by logging on to amusementwarehouse.com, carnivalwarehouse.com, or amusementparkwarehouse.com. Welcome to another edition of the Amusement Warehouse Podcast. We are very, very excited today to have the president and CEO of the IAFE, Marla Calico, with us. Marla, thanks for joining us.
Hello, Ron. It is certainly an honor to be here, and thank you for asking me to do this with you today.
I'm super excited. I especially have one question that's been bothering me for a little while that you can finally clear up for me. Look at her; she's getting nervous already. I don't think it's controversial, but it might be. I don't know. But for years, your organization, I called it the IAFE. But then I was working at the Florida State Fair a little bit, and this person was saying IAFE, IAFE, IAFE. What's the correct way to pronounce it?
Well, first of all, it's whatever you're most comfortable with.
Okay.
But particularly, I think I started using it because I spent so much time with Canadians, and it's just the default when you're talking with Canadians. We talk about IAFE, and the more I thought about
it, for theirs is cafe.
Yeah, it is. And it just kind of rolls off your tongue. So, sometimes I just get saying it really fast and it comes off IAFE anyway. So, but
it's funny is I was listening to another interview you did last night and just, getting a little bit about your background that I didn't know. And in the interview, you said both ways. You said IAFE and then later on you said IAFE. I said, that's just making me more confused. I don't even know what to call the thing. But,
either way is correct as long as you have the letters in the right order. IAFE.
Right, because there's the IFEA, of course, for the Festival Association. So it's it can get confusing, I guess, a little bit. But
yes, it can.
Yeah, I was in Florida, and the assistant manager kept saying IAFE, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" I never heard anybody say that before, and I had no idea what she was talking. She's like, the convention. I said, "Oh my gosh, I never heard anybody say that before." And then you said both, so I was very interested. The other thing that I was interested from here, and maybe it was just a brief mention, but I want to maybe flesh it out. But you you had some music scholarships going into college
when I was in high school.
Yeah, I guess they said going into college you were considering some music scholarships you were offered.
Yeah, I had scholarships to 2 local universities and 1 in Oklahoma. I was very much involved in music from the time I was born. I grew up in a family that sang on a regular basis.
Wow.
So I was blessed with some bit of vocal ability. I started taking piano lessons when I was 6 years old.
That's amazing.
And continued that until I graduated from high school. I started playing saxophone when I was 9. I played alto sax and took private lessons for that. I was involved in band. I defaulted to tenor sax in jazz band, and one year we needed a trombone player. So over the summer I learned how to play trombone, and self-taught on guitar. And so I had some extraordinary opportunities my senior year in high school. I'd been extended scholarships, but as we sometimes do, I got a little bit crazy as a graduating from high school, and I decided that maybe I needed to do something else. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And so consequently, I sold my saxophone, gave up my scholarships, and look where I'm at today.
So you're going to go for a performance for saxophone, or was it
well, that was it. So you have to think about the mid-1970s. Even today, how many female saxophone players have you even ever heard of that are recording artists, right? And so my dreams were, they were so unachievable, I think. And I did not want to be a teacher. I did not want to be a music educator. And that's where it would have taken me. And so
that's a safer path for sure. My son majored in music performance at University of Michigan. He's a timpani player, and I played too in high school. I matter of fact, you mentioned chorus. I always one of the jokes I always say is I was an all-state chorus, which I was, but I can't sing a lick. I played bass, which I was really, doing the thing. So when people talk about singing, I say, I was an all-state chorus. But yeah, my son, when he was at Michigan, it's unbelievable. People know about sports and they know about all those things, but to perform at an orchestra or at that level, it's impossible. It's just, it's like I to my friends that don't know anything about music, maybe know rock or something. I said, it's like you're auditioning for a band and you have, Eddie Van Halen and Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton, and they're all competing for one role.
Mm-hmm.
And who do you pick? They're all awesome. They're all excellent. It's just a matter of style at that point, really. But that's a tough racket. But I love music. I'm fascinated by music. So that little tidbit I heard mentioned, I was really, I pulled on that before. And I said to myself today, before I get lost in whatever we're talking about, I want to ask her about that, because that's really, I was wondering if you didn't specify if it was vocal or so sound.
Yeah, it was all of it. And, over the years, obviously I've lost my chops. I still sit down and play the piano every now and again.
Yeah.
And,
Awesome.
but singing, I actually, I did national anthem this past summer.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, for my little sister's retirement from the Air Force Reserve.
Wow.
And so I was very honored. She asked me to do the national anthem J Bear, the Air Force Base in Anchorage, Alaska, and about 100 people there. So that was an honor, and I've done that before for some things. And then just this past summer, I actually had an opportunity to sing a gospel number at the eulogy of my dear friend Barbara Renner, who passed away, who was legendary in our business. And so, so I actually performed twice this year, which is a little bit unusual for me.
That's that. And so when you're retiring, are you going to be singing a little bit? Do you need an agent? I can help you get booked at all these places. It'd be great.
You probably know some connections. No, but seriously, I do. I really want to sit back down and dedicate time, because there's and this, if you're a musician, there is something about the process of playing, right? It uses your brain in an entirely different way.
Yes.
And for several years, I played bass with my brother, and we were just
Wow.
a little jam group. We did blues, we did a little bit of jazz, and to just sit and, my brother would say to the lead guitar, Frank, you got it. And you just follow along, and we would play for an hour, just riffing off of everything. And it does something to your mind. So I actually want to spend perhaps a little bit of time, get the discipline back to spend some time every day with my instruments, see if I can get a little bit of my chops back.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. And people that can improvise, like my cousin's a professional guitarist, played with some pretty big names and things, but he was I was, classically trained. I can read music and stuff like that, actually, but he learned all by ear. And you're talking about people just riffing and playing. And I remember I was in jazz ensemble at high school, and my band teacher goes, "Okay, now improvise." And I'm like, "What do you mean?"
Yeah,
Where the notes?
Yeah, and that's what it was like. My brother, he too. I mean, he can play by ear, and he's awesome. Same thing. I read much better than he did, but the opportunities to improvise, that's what I did in high school in the jazz band. And that's I got a little bit known for my improvisation on my saxophone stuff.
Oh,
but
wow. Yeah, sax, you got to be able to improvise. I mean,
so, but
especially
it's
jazz or things like that.
It's music. I think when you have that joy and that love of it, it really just does something to your psyche, and so it makes me happy.
It does. Now I understand you're also involved with fairs.
A little bit, yeah.
In addition to the music.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, 47 years I've been in this business.
That's crazy. So I read you got started by working a little bit at the Ozark Empire Fair, which is in Springfield. Are you in Springfield now?
I am, yes.
Okay. In Springfield. So what drew you to the fair?
It was an accident. I needed a summer job. So seriously, think about this, Ron. I gave up all of those scholarships. So now I'm in college and I don't have any money to support what I'm doing. I've got to work. I have got to work. There's no option. My family can't support me. So I got a work study job at the time, Southwest Missouri State University. And so I'm thinking, you come into like February and you think, oh, I better look for a summer job. And so I reached out to my county 4-H agent at the time, and said, "Hey, Jim," I actually sent him a letter. "Jim, I'm needing a summer job, and you always hire college kids to be counselors at camp. So tossed my name in there." And he said, "No camps this summer." It was like they were cutting back on all of the camps. And he said, "But go over to Ozark Empire Fair and I talked to a guy over there. His name is Lewis Miller. And I think they have a part time position to help them." So I showed up, and it turned out Lewis Miller was a year older than my father, and he and my father were competitors in
Oh,
the show ring. They both showed Jersey cattle when they were in high school, and so he already knew my family. He or knew of my family, and of course, my 4-H agent gave me a good recommendation. And so I started just working part time. I actually transferred my work study program from the university out to the fair, and I started, working like 12 hours a week. And then before you knew it, I was a hungry, hungry college student. So when they said, "Oh, we run stock car races on Friday night. Do you want to come and sell tickets for the promoter?" And I said, "Oh, yes," because they paid me $5 an hour cash for
nice.
3 hours of work compared to the $2.35 an hour I was making on my payroll. So I sold
Wow.
tickets at stock car races Friday nights, April through October. I'd come back on Saturday morning and help in the run the feed barn and collect money from stalls for the horse shows and clean up stalls, fill the cigarette machine, whatever I needed to do because I just needed a paycheck.
That's great. And then eventually you said it was kind of like somebody took a leap and hired you as the assistant manager at some point, right? You
Yeah,
kind of,
so just a tiny background on Ozark Empire Fair. Our fair really fell victim to a couple of things. There was a carnival company, which I won't mention at this point in time, which got stranded in South America, and so we
oh
had a
yeah,
couple of years where we didn't. Our carnival was just like it was just nothing. It was like 10 rides, and it was I can't say what it is on broadcast. And it was drought. It was drought. We had like 2 years of drought. And coupled with that, it was when the farm economy was horrid. And in fact, it was just about at the time when my father lost our farm because interest rates were like near 20%. And so we had like 3 years and the fair was just we were so far in debt, we didn't have any money. I think, in comparison, if you think about it, this would have been 1982. We were $350,000 in debt and
wow.
paying almost 20% in interest. And it just looked so bleak and so dark that the board was actually talking about how to shut it down and close it
Wow.
down. And the guy who ran the full-time food concessions at the fair grounds, so like he did the corn dogs and pops at the stock car races and the horse shows and stuff like that. He said, "I have invested far too much money in this place, and I want it, and I want it to succeed, and I think it can." And so they tapped him to be the general manager. He agreed to work for 3 years without a salary so that I could get paid. And he said, "Calico, you're going to be my assistant manager."
No
and
way.
so, uh, and so we started. It's 1983, and it was an incredible experience. And I'm happy to say we had the entirety of the debt paid off within 3 years. And for the time that I was there, we never operated in the red for as long as I was there.
That's fantastic. That's a great story with saving the fair and doing things. Some of those experiences that you go through that are, so important or so have a downside to them that you overcome are really, really great experiences.
Well, I tell you, there were probably 2 or 3 things that I learned. Obviously, Dan Fortner, who was my mentor in so many
Mhm.
ways, I could talk for days about him and the lessons I learned. But I think the important takeaway that has always stuck with me is that when you are transparent and open with your community, you will find out that your community cares. You know, we cannot operate in the dark. And the minute that we began to tell our story to the community, "Hey, your fair's going to shut down if you don't get involved." "What do you mean it's going to shut down?"
Mhm.
Because
You're taking all that money.
exactly. And yeah, and it looks like that on the surface,
It
right?
does. Yeah.
But we involved the community, and we reached out and we said, we need help, and you're going to have to help us. And if you want this fair to survive, will you sponsor? Dan went personally to some top food concessionaires and said, for 2 years, will you help us get out of this? Will you pay double your rent for 2 years?
Oh,
And they
wow.
did. And they
Wow.
did. And we organized an advisory committee to just people from all walks of life who their common goal was they loved the fair. And so I took that away. And I will tell you, Ron, that that all came back in so many ways when we got to 2020 and the COVID, because we found that communities, they took for granted their fair. They assumed it was always going to be there. And I think we saw for some fairs, if they really hadn't talked about the impact, what it takes to put a fair on, how the sausage is
Excuse me.
made, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
So it's that understanding the role that your fair plays in the community. I think that was one of the biggest takeaways that I got from that experience. And then, just always, if you want something, you got to work hard for it. And
Mhm.
we worked hard and did whatever it took to get that fair out of the hole.
That's a great story, great experience that you had to uh, start you off or with your career, and then I'm sure it stayed with you the whole time or
Has.
till today with how to overcome it. Have you ever done much talks on how to overcome digging out of a hole or whatever you want to call it? Or
I haven't really done that, but I think in so many ways it's woven into a lot of the keynotes that I give, because I always bring it back to um, understanding. I think my role when I do a keynote for a state association or regional meeting is to remind people that what you do matters, right? And that how you do that, how you tell your story to the community is so critical. So not in a very specific way, I haven't tackled it, but some elements are always woven into almost every keynote or workshop that I ever do.
it's interesting, which sparks a thought I had before we get into your IFE leadership career, but as non-profit, mostly nonprofits for fairs, that always I started out in the nonprofit world a little bit. I worked for the Leukemia Society and ran
Mhm.
events and things like that. But I also have an MBA background in business. So I always thought about, and I concentrate a little bit on nonprofit organizations. But thinking about the structure and how they work, I mean, it's a tough a bunch of cats for you to sort of herd, because you have the top tier where you have professional people that run events and do things, and then you have a whole bunch of under ones that vary from being really really good to being I don't want to be negative, I know you represent everyone, but they sort of run it in a way that you're not really sure, and the volunteerism or the uh, that whole notion of volunteerism sometimes bothers me, because if you're going to volunteer, then volunteer. I had one of the regional meetings one time. They were talking about speaking. They said, "What topic would you want to do?" And I said, "You know what I want to do? If you volunteer at the soup kitchen, you have to serve soup. You can't just make an excuse why you can't serve soup all the time, because you do hear that a lot at some of the not well. We're just a nonprofit. Oh, we're just the volunteers. We're just this. We're just that." And it's this sort of mental attitude that keeps them from doing things sometimes. So I know that can be frustrating, or it sometimes hurts the fairs from moving ahead because of that state of people just are doing the same thing and don't feel like they can improve or do better. So you've been a great coach, I know, trying to cheerlead everybody into doing better and doing things like that. But that's got to be, I would imagine, frustrating for the industry, and that a lot of them do get stuck or whatever because of the volunteer thing that they do.
Well, I would disagree with you on the term a lot. I think it is by far the minority of the
Mm-hmm.
fairs. And again, I speak from IAFE membership. So we represent
Sure.
probably maybe a little bit more than half of the fairs in the United States.
Is that it? Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was curious about
we
that.
have right at 1,000 members, and I've tried to get a handle on it and researched in a number of ways, but
Mm-hmm.
we often throw out that there's probably over 2,000 fairs in the United States. So
Wow.
so when we think about that, I have to say, from the standpoint of what I know and the fairs that I know and the fairs that I work with. And I can pull out from across our membership very, very large fairs and very, very small fairs where very small fairs are being run with an absolute degree of excellence that you wouldn't even
Absolutely.
imagine, right? So I think what it comes down to is Sometimes it's the understanding, not for profit is a tax status. It's not a business plan,
Absolutely.
right? And we often
Absolutely.
talk about that. And so I think I see quite a bit of that. I see a lot of folks that have learned to be more agile and more flexible, but because of our rich history, FAIR's rich history, where they are an element of the community, born of a community. And so that means the leaders of the community have come together to do this. Sometimes we are bound and tied down by our history. And I often
Absolutely.
talk about that is, we need to step back and look. I just had a phone conversation with the fair yesterday that wanted me to take a look at their bylaws and their structure. They've had the same fair board president for 30 years.
Mm.
And so maybe that's great. And if
Right,
they're
right. Or maybe
successful,
it's a disaster.
if they're successful, but
Mhm.
I talk about, okay, so you've got this iconic leader. So what are you doing to plan for the future? Because we all die. you know, and at least we have that. And so, how do you plan for that next? And what are you doing to strengthen throughout? And we're seeing a lot of that come along. I've seen a number of fairs, large fairs, go from changing their governance system to what we would call the old style, where fair board members were in it for life. And now, then, we've got a different governance structure. So, uh, you know, we're just a historic business, and with
Yeah,
those
absolutely.
historic elements, sometimes parts of it were slower to change, but I have to look at it as the overall,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
overall, I see such a degree of professionalism, whether they're volunteers or paid, and really this effort to be the very, very best fair that they can for their community.
Yeah, and I think you've done a great job, or the organization has tried over the years, with the certifications to teach, to understand. Was it? I was at my I was talking to the dean of the business school of the college I went to, graduate school. And I know there's a couple, but for the number of events out there, because there's event planners at I was just talking to somebody yesterday for the sheriff's department here locally, the event planner there is no coursework to speak of, serious coursework for event planning. There's a zillion jobs in the United States for event planning. The one college by me started it like one course and had some people come and do it, but you know, uh, there's not a lot. There's not a lot of comprehensive teaching as far as the college level to do events. And I know there's the George Mason had some things, and a couple of places had a few things, but there's not for as many jobs as there are out there. I'm just shocked by the lack of sort of training to do it.
Sometime you ought to check out Missouri State University. They
Missouri State.
have it's through their, I think it started through their hospitality division, but I just went to their, I think it was their 20th anniversary celebration in the spring. A good friend of mine was retiring. He's headed up and developed that program, and the level of people present in that room who graduated. So the giant, that Las Vegas, that sphere thing,
Mhm.
there were 2 people who are like top execs with the Sphere. They came out of that program.
Oh wow.
There were people who the new, I guess, the Raiders, the football team's now based in Las Vegas. There were 2 people from that stadium and the team. They excel in sports, event management, sports management, all
Mhm.
levels of that, but the very basics, they do a fabulous job there. And I taught a course there. I taught a semester probably 15 years ago on event management, and but they've really developed the program over the years. It's pretty awesome.
That's great. Just the sheer number of jobs, though, you'd think it would be a pervasive major at a lot of places, but there's so
Hmm.
many
Hmm.
opportunities in the event industry, not just fairs and festivals, but
Hmm.
everything out there. And like you say, most of them do kind of tend towards. There does seem to be a lot of like facility management type places where they run the building and they
Hmm.
do things like that, but actually running the event, like figuring out like what's my goal of the event? Is it to raise money? Is it a fundraiser? Am I there to promote tourism?
Hmm.
What's the point? There's on that side. I know there's some, like I said, I know there's some
Hmm.
out there, but I just shocked that there's not more of it. And it's great that the IAFE is doing something to try and carry on or pass on that knowledge in a formal way for
Yeah,
for
yeah.
your
Our
your
program
constituents.
is, it takes from its structure A little bit similar. There used to be across the country through land grant universities, the extension programs that give us
Mhm.
4-H, right? A lot of times they developed and they had a reference. It was called Extension Short Course. And so maybe, in the spring, they might run a series of once a week, we're going to talk about grassland management, or once a week, we're going to talk about the proper rations for dairy cattle. It was a little bit of intense learning over a period of time so that you could improve your farm operations. So having some familiarity of that when I joined the team and we'd been looking at some sort of a fair school for a number of years, um, the format that we had originally thought on, we decided it was going to be so limited to the number of people. And so we formed an advisory committee. In fact, I was just looking up the other day, trying to find some history on this for someone. And I think we had like 8 people that had been in the business for a while. And we just spent a lot of time talking about what do we want to do? How do we want to go about this? And so the Institute of Fair Management is, I think we're up to 37 or 38 short courses that cover, they run the gamut of the fair business today,
Mhm.
right? And so some of the courses may be 75 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 or 3 of them are like 4 to 6 hours long. They're offered in a variety of circumstances. A lot of them, you don't even have to be enrolled to take them because we want to lift up the entire industry, right? But what we have found is that it's affordable and it's doable. And it's doable for anybody, no matter what size the fair.
Sure.
We've had associate members, Andrew Vandepopelier from Haas and Wilkerson Insurance. He's been through the program. Sarah Novak at Triangle Talent, Mark Sparks at Triangle Talent. They've been through the program. So we have a lot of people in different roles in the fair that have been through the program, and it just keeps growing and it's very successful. We're beginning to see fairs when they now are posting positions like for a general manager or CEO, the requirement that either you have graduated from the Institute of Fair Management or you have to commit to enroll in it, because it does give you, regardless of your background, it gives you a solid base to understand all of the intricacies of the fair industry specifically.
Yeah, I think that's great that sharing the knowledge and understanding things. Even at some big fairs, and I've worked at a couple. It struck me, when you worked at Ozark, I'm probably, you said you had a really good mentor who taught you, but sometimes you get into. I've been in some big fairs, and people have been in a role for say 30 years. And I never thought about it before, but I guess I'm fortunate because I get to see a lot of different fairs and work with a lot of different fairs and different ideas and different takes on things. But like, like a subject came up about a certain aspect of their job, and they didn't know about. I forget what the specific scenario was, but I was just shocked that they didn't know. But then I was thinking, they've been in the same sort of silo for 30 years or whatever, doing it the same way, and they didn't have that, and they're probably not a person who goes to the convention. I forget what the exact role was, but so they didn't hear a lot from different people. But learning from, I don't know if there's a way you can almost like work at it, like loan somebody to another fair for the season, just to learn a little bit about how some
Yeah.
people do things differently.
Yeah, and I've got a pretty good example of that same thing, because whenever we first started the program, and I spent a lot of one-on-one with people telling them what the program is, especially because I knew them. I said, look, we hit down the middle. In any class that we offer, there's going to be someone at this end of the thing, they don't have a clue as to
Right.
anything about this, right? But we will also have in the same class someone, that's what they do. They could be teaching the class. And I don't care if that's your profession, if you could teach the class, we're shooting for the middle. So I want this person with no experience to say, oh man, that helps me understand, and I need to do this, this, and this to know more. And the person at the other end to say, oh, either a good reminder or,
Mhm.
hmm, but you have to take everything. So the case in point, this was the CFO at a state fair. And that CFO could teach, and eventually did teach for a while, our financial management classes, right? However, when he went into the class on competitive exhibits, why do we have competitive exhibits? What about those quilts, cakes, cookies, and photographs? How do we do a good program? He told me afterwards, he goes, now I get it. when that team comes to me and their budget for ribbons or whatever is this versus that, now I get it. I understand why it's important. And to me, that was the proof right there is of what we're doing is that regardless of your role, you're going to walk away with at least some exposure to something that's not in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, it's good, like you said, for a person who might be advanced to kind of go over the fundamentals, that the analogies in sports and in music. Like you could be a great saxophone player, but you still practice your scales, right? I mean,
Exactly right.
just like a beginner does, and then you forget sometimes, or you go, but it's essential to relearn the fundamentals all the time, or keep an eye on the fundamentals and move forward. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So IFE, you were on different positions with the IAFE. You work with them closely before becoming the president and CEO of the IAFE. Was that something you had on your radar that you thought you might be doing in the future? Was it just kind of
No. In fact, Dan Fortner, I mentioned, my mentor, in 1983, he said, if you are going to do the best job for Ozark Empire Fair, you've got to figure out what this IAFE stuff is and figure out what they're doing, and you've got to get involved. And so, in fact, he personally paid for me to go to my very first convention in 1983. He paid his own way, and he paid for me to go so that I could be there and learn. And so he encouraged me. So I started volunteering for committees. I volunteered back in the day. There were people at the doors that were checking your badges, and it was the best job to have during the convention as a volunteer because you got to meet all of these people, right? So I would volunteer to be a door guard. I was on the advertising committee, ag committee, competitive exhibits committee, the convention committee, and I got tapped one year to be a committee chair. And I just loved getting those types of exposures. And so I just was involved at such a degree. And then in 2001, I got a call in late September that said the second vice chair of the association is dying of cancer and is not expected to live until convention. And so when we get to convention, would you accept it if we brought your name forward to serve the remaining term of the second year, which then puts you in line for the chairs and you'll be automatically moved to the first chair? And it was like, could have knocked me over with a feather. I had no idea that would ever have happened in my life. And so I did. On the opening day of the 2001 convention, I was introduced as the named second vice chair to fulfill the remaining 4 days of that term. And then so at the end of the 2001 convention, I moved into the first vice chair for 2002. And then I served as the chair of the body in 2003. So it was an honor of a lifetime to serve this association in that role, but something I had never, ever dreamed of. And so, consequently, thinking about the IFE as a job, that never crossed my mind at all. In fact, when Jim Tucker asked me to join the staff, we were having a conversation because I'd applied to be a manager at 2 different state fairs. And I was just wanting to get caught up on what the skinny was on those 2 positions. And he called me and said, "Don't leave town. I've got a job for you here." So
that's great. And when you did become the president and CEO, what was sort of on your agenda as far as things you wanted to do for the organization to lead it? And
I had some specific things. One of them was that we would deliver a more engaged membership, that you weren't just a member, because it's one thing to pay dues, but it's another thing to show up. It's another thing to contribute. It's another thing to be a part. So I wanted a more engaged membership. I wanted to move our association forward and financially and successfully in terms of making a move, because whenever I took over as CEO, I knew that our contract had ended with the Paris Ballet's organization in Las Vegas, and that we were going to be moving the convention, and I wanted to do that and do that successfully. And I knew that was going to be a major task, even though our association did not know that. I knew that it was going to be a major task to do that and to lead our team forward for that. I wanted to fuel everything that we were doing by getting our IAFE Education Foundation um, up and running in a regular manner. We really were not doing too much with the foundation. It existed, but it was a holding place for funds raised for the Institute of Fair Management. But I thought it was so much more and could be so much more. And so those things were really, those were the things that were really at the top of my list that I wanted to get accomplished. I wanted to make sure that we stayed focused on.
That's great. That's great. And I'm still struck by that. You say 50% of the fairs you think
Mhm.
are
Yeah.
not members,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
50% are members. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a shocking number. That really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. It
That's,
is.
and that would include, well, if you're a member of like your state organization, you're not automatically a member of the
No,
IAFE. So,
no, we have a separate due structure,
mhm.
but we are one of the things I'm very, very proud of, and it's taken some time, but now Iowa and Arizona, their respective state associations have made a commitment that in Iowa's case, I believe it is for 3 years, they will fund every fair in their state if they're not already a member, and they will cover their dues for 3 years up to this minor threshold. And then Arizona just made that commitment this past year. So right now we have every fair in Arizona is a member, courtesy of the Arizona Fairs
Well,
Association. So
that's a great idea. That
yeah, and
so
so
they could tack on.
those associations made those financial commitments because they believe so strongly that their members should be a part of that. But not every state association has that kind of resource that's available to them. And I have to say, there are some state associations and regional associations that do an absolutely superb job of delivering education and networking opportunities. And, in as much as I want every fair in the world to be a member of this organization, if they feel that is being delivered to them, what we have is getting to them in a different way. I'm hard pressed to argue with that, right? Because sometimes they just need a little bit of exposure on a different level to understand that there is a bigger, wider world out there, and that maybe you can learn something from somebody from a different state or different region. And we've seen that happening, particularly after we had our convention in Indianapolis in 2022. We did see a significant change on some of those states where we don't have a lot of members. We began to see some increases in membership, and I see that trend's going to continue as well.
That's great. Yeah, I didn't really think of that about that before, but and so some of those organizations, you have 50% or more of the state organization is not a member of the IFE, but they exist. They're out there. They're potential.
Well, in the instance of the state organization, yes, I think except for maybe one, we have if there exists a state or association of fairs, they're all members. I think Louisiana, I don't hate to call out names, but I think Louisiana may be the only one that isn't. And yet, in their defense, they have more festivals than they have
Mhm.
fairs. They are a huge festival association, and so um, but other than that, no, we've got them. And then, of course, Western Fairs is a member, Rocky Mountain Association of Fairs is a member, and then we do reciprocal agreements with the international associations, with the others that represent their country, the Canadian Association, the Australian Association, and then the Royal Agriculture Societies of the Commonwealth.
That's great. So looking at the fair industry today, what are your uh, biggest? What do you think the biggest challenges are? I know there's a big thing with the unaccompanied minors or minors causing problems. We have rising costs and all those things. What do you feel are the biggest issues a fair manager faces
Yeah.
today?
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. The issues for the fairs. Well, certainly safety and security in an overall sense is a top concern, and that is it it's a top concern because at your heart, I mean, one of the metrics that matters the most about completing a fair is, was it safe?
Yeah.
How safe was it for our guests? Because that is the ultimate. You can do everything in the world, but safety is the ultimate goal. So the fact that we are having these incidents with youth, call it whatever you will, wilding, social media attention, trend, they're whatever they're doing is of a huge concern right now. And the resources that it takes to control that, to attempt to control that, in our country today, I don't know of a single law enforcement entity that has the full staffing that they need, nor do they have the resources to pay for full staffing. So now all of a sudden you want to take a third of the staff out to be working and taking care of the largest event in town. Where do these people come from, right? And so the cost has gone skyrocketed to do that. So I think that it's certainly a top concern, and then you weave into that the fact that where our country is right now, and where it stands with guns, and now then you've got a situation that becomes almost untenable, and it is very, very frightening. I think I don't know of a fair manager who's not just on edge because of this coupling of unrestrained guns and this tendency toward immediate youth, and let's blame it's primarily youth, young people under 25, generally violence. It's a big concern. Um, I think there is, particularly because almost every fair I know depends upon volunteers.
Mhm.
I don't know that I would call it a concern, but it's a wariness. It's an awareness that you have got to be working harder to get volunteers. You cannot assume. And one of the things that we have to do, I think, as an association, to help our members in this regard is to help them understand the changing landscape of people that want to volunteer. You know, I often hear people say, well, those young people, they don't want to volunteer. Well, yes, they do want to volunteer, but they just want to do it in a different way. And are you willing to change your program of volunteerism to make it so that they want to be a part of that? And we have some stellar examples across the country where it works. You know, if you understand who your volunteers can be and what they want to do, you can get them. So those are the two things that I think. But you know, just like anybody else in our society right now, any business, you're concerned about rising cost and how you're going to pay employees, and especially if your state or your province is mandating different minimum wages. It's all of those things that it takes to make any business run right now. Fair
Overtime.
businesses are concerned. Yep.
Overtime too.
Oh my
I run
God.
a fair in New
Yeah.
York that I manage, and that we used to be 3 weekends, and we moved it to 10 or 11 days straight. And it costs us more to go 11 days straight than it does for it to go 2 weekends, because
Mhm.
the overtime, the mandatory, over 8 hours or over 40 hours in a week
Mhm.
is tough. It's
Mhm.
really tough.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Those are big expenses, or big challenges
Mhm.
facing the industry in general.
Mhm.
I've got an interesting question. It's always, I'm not an agricultural person. I grew up in New Jersey. It wasn't my thing. I mean, I admire agriculture and have seen a lot of it. But one thing that sort of has always made me wonder, uh, um, when you go to see a judging or a contest or whatever, and
Mhm.
I've been to, from state fairs to little fairs or things like that, I have no idea what they're judging. I
Mhm.
always wondered, like, why can't they have a little bit of, and you're going to tell me there's some that have them. I know I'm sure there are, but everyone I've been to, and I've been to a lot. I mean, not as many as you, but I've been to a lot, more than most people. And you wander into those things sometimes, and I have no idea, like, are they looking for a long tail or a bushy thing, or, there's like no play, but like, it's like if I came from Mars and I landed a basketball game,
Uh-huh.
I would somehow understand the rules from the announcer telling me, but I'm
Color
curious.
commentator. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Sometimes with the judging or with the contest like that, I
uh-huh.
would love to see that, or even if they just had a couple that they explained it to, because I'm curious about it, but I just didn't get it from sitting there, and I got bored and left because I didn't know what the heck they were looking for.
I am so glad you've said that.
Really?
I have a keynote. I've only done it once and I'd like to do it more, but it's called "But I Can't Understand What You're Saying." And I
That's
come up with I literally play some clips of a judge giving reasons, and I look around the audience and I say, "And how many of you actually understood that?" And you're in the county fair business.
not, yeah,
So
yeah.
it is. So it is, number 1, you've identified what I think is a serious issue. 2, we are beginning to see some solutions, and I call them color commentators.
Right,
And
right.
they can sit up there, and while the judge is doing their thing, they can say, "Now, as we're looking at this class of 2-year-old Guernsey heifers right now, you need to know that a dairy cow is," and they can talk about what they're looking for. They can tell what the judge, and when the judge talks about this, this is what they're doing. There aren't too many of them, but we're beginning to see that. And then we've also seen, it's more of a kind of teach yourself or listen yourself, but a number of fairs have, you can walk in and there will be a sheet of paper and it says, "You be the judge." And it will be a printed description of what the judge is looking for, right? But that means you have to kind of pick it up, read it,
Right.
and
Find it.
follow along.
Mhm.
But I know, and believe me, Ron, I grew up showing dairy cattle, and I was on the state 4-H dairy judging team. I know how to give reasons, right? But I can walk into a show ring today and listen, and sometimes I can't understand what they're saying.
Okay, so I'm not the only one.
No,
I've
you're not the
tried.
only
I've
one.
really tried. I really
Mhm,
have. I've sat in a bunch of those, and I'm just
mhm.
so curious about it. But they weren't feeding me, and I'm hungry, and they're not feeding me what I
Yeah.
need. I would love to know, and things I think might win that look good to me. What do I know?
Mhm,
And they didn't win, so it's just and it's
mhm,
it's almost like putting in my promoter hat. It's almost a way to add some content for the fair, to a
mhm.
person that's not
Yes.
otherwise 4-H, interested or 4-H solely interested.
And
Um,
it's not, yeah, and it's not even that. I mean, it comes down to the species. I was traveling with, at the time, he was the assistant manager of the Royal Welsh Show, so the State Fair of Wales. And we walked into the Ohio State Fair and we were watching the pig show. And both of us, I mean, I grew up, my dad had a farrowing operation, he raised pigs. We didn't understand a single word the judge was saying
really,
because he was using a language, just kind of like sometimes if you have a coach that's the commentator for an NFL game might use a different terminology and you're going,
right,
what is that? It's the same thing. And so what happens is, I think what it's illustrated is a fair is serving two different audiences, right?
right.
So that audience that is in the show ring and they're supporting family and other breeders, they know exactly what that judge is saying and why they're saying it. And they need to hear it that way. But then we've got this other audience that they're the ones that are coming and paying the bills because they're there to eat food and go to the carnival and go see the shows. We need to teach them as well. And so you've kind of hit a hot button with me, is that I
Wow.
think we need to do a better job with that. Yes.
Yeah, because sometimes you go to. I'm thinking of a fair here in Virginia that I worked with for many years, and they're very 4-H agricultural based, but they're very insular too. It's like if you happen to wander in the barn, you feel like you're going to be thrown out any moment because you're like trespassing or something like that.
Mhm, mhm,
Because I even asked the guy naively, probably 20 years ago, I said, "Why do you even have this during the fair? Because if you don't want the people there that are coming to the
mhm,
fair,
mhm,
why have it?" But I know everybody wants to send that message of agriculture out there and educate people about things. But if you're insular and you keep the other people out, you can't really do it. So, I
mhm.
think there's a lot that can be done with that, but you got to have everybody working together and
And it takes the
awesome.
cooperation of those livestock exhibitors, and some of them,
Absolutely.
because they're in it, but think about it, they're in it for the business, they're there for a specific
Sure.
purpose. They may not care that ultimately you need to do this so that you will have a fair for them, but, sometimes they're a little bit, I don't wanna be stereotypical, but sometimes a little bit resistant to change as well, but it is a valid point, but I do know that there are a lot of fairs talking about ways that they can either extend, enhance, or do something else with that show ring experience so that it's more meaningful to
Yeah,
fair goers.
absolutely.
It's definitely in the chatter, I'll tell you that.
And I think it's a big opportunity for fairs too to
Mhm,
educate, to have people participate, to make it and there's ways you can make it even fun and interesting. You don't have to do it
mhm,
in every single serious competition. Maybe you have one big one that's just for non for the people. Maybe they could vote like you're saying or riff on that some way. You
uh-huh.
could have fake betting odds or something like that, or a weird thing to see if you can pick the right one. I don't know, just to make it fun a little bit and educate at the same time.
Uh-huh.
Because
Yeah.
that's what I used to have an entertainer all the time, since passed away, but he loved agriculture and he talked to me about all this, and he would say, "It's educational. It's educational." I said, "Mike, when you say educational, I hear boring. I want it to be both. I want it to be a little bit exciting. It's great if you
Exactly.
preach to
You
people, but
yeah, exactly right.
you gotta have something in there." Um, okay, that's interesting. That's really interesting that you had that. We're thinking about the same thing because that's always kind of mystified me the whole time. I could never
Well,
understand.
and I can take it a step further.
Oh, really?
We undertook last year, with the assistance of 20 fairs from across North America, the first major validated national research North American research study of consumers, fairgoers, to what they know, not only what they know about food, where they get their information about food, but in also in conjunction, how they want to learn about food, how they want, and we talked about food in specifically, and then when they're at a fair, what they like to do. And by far and large, they want to see animals, but they don't want to sit in a show ring and see the competitions because they don't understand it. And that was in our research study. And so we just released that to our membership in the late spring, and we're just now beginning to do workshops on it. I did a workshop in Scotland based around that last June. We're going to have a workshop extending on that, 2 workshops at our 2024 convention. I'm going to be talking about it at the Canadian Association's convention in November. And so, with that research in mind, we can now go to our members and say, but here's what your guests are saying. They're saying they don't understand in the show ring. Let's figure out ways. So it's like what you're talking about is exactly in tune with what we've learned, what we've validated, and what we know as an industry we need to build upon.
Yeah, I think it's I say a lot. You've seen rides, entertainment, food vendors, all those things. If I went to a fair 20 years ago and I came now, it's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
But the agriculture, the barns and stuff are pretty much the same. There's not been a lot of innovation on that side. But they in your life because they are entrenched. Some of the, at least that's the fairs I've worked with and on varying levels. It does seem like it's tough nut to crack because they are very sort of insular society, and they don't. Some of them, at least, don't want people coming in. But if they do want to pass on this knowledge and this information and make people excited about it, the fair would be a great place to do it.
Mm-hmm.
No question
It is.
about it.
Yeah, that's true.
No question about it. So we went over the challenges that are facing. What about there's a lot of talk, at least at the state levels, at least on the East Coast, which I'm more familiar with than other places, about the volunteers and the managers and the people aging. But I have seen an influx of younger people lately with things like my daughter works with me now, and she went to I don't know, I'm going to say the state because I'll probably identify the guy, but went to a state convention, and I hadn't been to it for a while, maybe 10 years or something like that. And I went with her, and she said, "Oh, I met so-and-so. He's managing this fair." And that guy, when I was 25 years old, I thought was like 100 years old. And then now we're 30 years later, and he's still the manager of the fair, which I guess is great on some level. But, you could tell like it hadn't really moved forward, and there was nobody else to take it. I don't know. Or the person just clinging on to, that's what I struggle with, is like, what is the reason for that? And are they just clinging to power because they like it and they love it, which is great and can be great, but there's sometimes has to be some new blood or a succession plan or something to bring in a little bit of different perspective on things.
Actually, we've actually seen, although you're still going to see that I'm not discounting what you encountered there, but it is more swinging the other way. Again, looking at what I've got to look at, which is our entire membership globally. I see it at convention. We have begun to skew so much younger than we used to. I would say,
too. Yeah.
I would guess we're skewing at the top end in the like low 50s, and so the majority we're getting so many young people that are involved. But again, I think it comes down to the locale, the fair. And if you think about, and you pointed out East Coast, and that's what you're familiar with, the structure and a lot of the fairs in rural East Coast are very different than those in other parts of the country, because in as much as we think about the East, if you're from Midwest, you think about East Coast and think, oh my God, all those people. But then you go to rural upstate New York, you go to some places in New Hampshire and Vermont and even in Massachusetts, and it's a tiny little community, right? And the fair may be getting close to 200 years old, if not. And the circumstances are entirely different than, say, for even a fair in Iowa or Minnesota. So in those instances, the community itself may not have an influence of younger people that are willing to be involved, or the fair may have become so insular and so closed that they're not open to the other ideas. It runs both ways, right?
Yeah.
But
I
by and large, across the sector, we are seeing younger people in every angle. And I have to give you a quick story. I was doing a workshop on succession planning at the Rocky Mountain meeting last November. And I've done this workshop for probably 10 years and always ends up the same. I've got a few younger people in there when I talk about the age differences and stuff like that. They're going along. At the end, I had a question from this young gal, and she was very, very young. And she goes, I've got exactly the opposite problem. Our fair board is 12 people and we're all under the age of 30 and nobody will take us serious.
Wow.
And I was
That's
like,
great.
I said, okay, I've never heard that before. So, but we are seeing some changes, Ron.
I
It's
agree with you. I've seen it in the last
mhm,
couple of years because there was a time I was nervous. Like as I'm turning 50 or whatever, I thought I was gonna be the youngest person there by 20
mhm.
years. But it is getting better. And like you say, it's especially at the national level and in the Midwest and different places you could see
And I
um,
I
the
would like to
change.
say that the IAFE's leadership in mentoring and enhancing young professionals has really helped open those doors, because our young professionals group is now they're 12 years old, I think, and maybe close to 14, and real leaders. We've helped mentor them, and now what we see is at a state level, a lot of state associations now have a young professionals group to help make sure that we're fostering those young board members, especially, and the young professional scholarships that are offered to come to our convention. They're not, you don't have to be a staff member, you can be a volunteer, you can be a board member. And when they come and are exposed to that, to me, I think we see the proof is really there that that initiative to mentor, to enhance, to support young people, to make sure they know they have a place, it's paying off way down the road.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and correct me if I'm wrong. I may be wrong, but I think early on in the program with the CFE or whatever, you sort of had I think one of the requirements is you had to be like an assistant manager at a place or something
Mhm.
along those
Yeah.
lines early
Mhm.
on. And I always found that, I was like, what about these big, like I'm thinking of the Coastal Carolina Fair in Charleston, South Carolina, where they're all volunteer. You can't be an assistant manager anywhere. So it was like, I don't want to say I was afraid. I was nervous that it was going to basically be, the top fairs that had an assistant manager, and then everything would be from those places. But now it's opened up, and you got the volunteer ability. So I think that was great, and I think that
Well,
opened a lot of things up.
and to clarify, so the CFE still exists, and to
Mhm.
get a CFE, you still have to be on senior executive staff. You have to be
You
a
do,
paid
okay,
professional. That's the CFE. But we also added, I believe now 4 years ago, a
okay,
CVFM, a certified volunteer fair manager that will recognize, but the key now on both of them, and it took years to get to this, you can't get either until you've graduated from the Institute of Fair Management. So that puts the teeth in our educational program,
the
that it's
foundation they
not
get before they
it's
can.
not just based upon your service to the IAFE, which quite honestly, that was what the CFE was. It was based on your service to the association. So now then it's got teeth in it. You have to have graduated from the Institute of Fair Management. And then if you meet the qualifications as a volunteer or as a paid professional, then you can apply for one of those two certifications.
Yeah, no matter what the details are, I think it's become more robust.
Absolutely.
I used to call, and not just the IFE. There's a lot of organizations that have these certifications,
Mhm.
and sometimes I call them scavenger hunts. Like I need one of this and two of that and three of that, and okay, I can get the badge. And
Uh,
and that to me is a shame because there are so many, and I think you do require. Some of the people that are going through the program to teach a class at a convention or different places, and I think that's great because that gives them content.
participation, you're asked, you can gain points. Have you presented a workshop? Have
Mhm.
you been in committee leadership? That's the part that ties it to the
Sure.
association. But the fact that you've gone through the Institute of Fair Management program and completed all of those 37 or 38 courses, that has become the key. And that's where you get your points now.
Yeah, it's much, much more. And again, I don't I didn't study the details completely, but what I know, I've seen it become much, much more robust. And that's great for the future of the industry, I think, because
And then, for those fairs that purely operate with volunteers, we still have the Heritage Awards. And the Heritage Awards, we recognize 5 individuals every year with a Heritage Award who are purely volunteers and who exemplify that excellence in leading their fairs. And they don't get paid a dime. And so we always, of course, the deadline has passed now by the time we're recording this, but we always encourage people in the summertime to nominate one of those outstanding volunteer fair leaders for our Heritage Awards.
that's great. I think the whole process, the whole thing is wonderful. Believe it or not, I've been yapping at you for almost an hour. I took up all your time, I think, by saying things, but I learned so much. And when is your last? When are you finished? I'd love to have you back again because there's so much I didn't cover.
My last day by my current contract is December 31st, and once the executive committee has made the decision on the new hire, I will meet with them and the new hire and determine if they want me to do anything for them in the coming year or so. But as I can't answer that question probably until we get close to December. So right now, December 31st is my last day. I'm almost on my 100-day countdown right now. So
that's sad. Well, I wish you the best. I thank you for everything you've done. And I really hope to have you again before you go, as there's so much we didn't cover because there's so much out there. I love fairs and I love the industry, and it's great to see it's prospering and doing well.
Thank you, and appreciate the opportunity, Ron. This has been great.
Thank you for everything you do for the fair industry.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Innovative Ticketing is the ticketing source made for the amusement industry. Our staff of professionals can guide you through your setup, assist with customer service, even on the weekends when you most need it, and help increase your sales through promotions that work. Innovative Ticketing is the ticketing source made for the amusement industry. Sign up today at innovativeticketing.com.